So one of the main benefits of using LINQ and automatically scaffolded models is that converting the result of a query to JSON becomes a lot easier when you have C# objects representing the tables. There are lots of ways to do it in C# and in other languages. We'll look at the most basic and easy way that's kind of tied to LINQ. So let's say we have a patrons object. So patrons is just the scaffolded class from the library database. And I'm creating a patrons object manually right here. But it just as easily could have come out of a query. I'm just showing it this way to make it really simple for now. So if I have a patrons object, if I want to convert it to JSON, all I do is call this JSON method and pass in that object. It's really that automatic. And then you automatically get the JSON string containing the result of that conversion. So it has something called name, and the value is Dan. It has something called cardnum, and the value is 4. It automatically determined these field names just based on the field names in the patrons object. It has something called name and something called cardnum. You automatically get the curly braces, the quotes, colons, everything in a valid JSON form. So this is just a simple example, though, with a hard-coded patron. In reality, we're going to be doing this with LINQ queries. So let's say I have a simple LINQ query that gets all patrons from the library. So here is that query. Query itself is going to be an IEnumerable. If we try to convert that directly to JSON, it's just going to say something like an IEnumerable object with certain fields, like what is the count and things like that. That's not what we want. We want an array of patrons objects. So we first convert the IEnumerable to an array, just query.toArray. That's just a built-in method on IEnumerables in C#. And the result is an actual C# array, and when you convert an array to JSON, it automatically creates a JSON array with the appropriate array markers in the JSON result. And then inside that array, you just get each one of the objects within. So name, Joe, cardnum 1, name, Ann, cardnum 2. And that's it. We're done. So again, these field names here, they came from the field names in the C# class. Patrons class has a field called name and one called cardnum. But what if your model, the way you designed your tables and thus scaffolded your tables, what if you used different names in your LMS? And my view needs standardized names. It needs to know exactly what it's looking for. So this is also a trivial problem to solve with LINQ, changing these names. All we do is, instead of selecting P in the query, we select a new anonymous type, and this lets us specify names of the fields that we want. So I'm saying I want something called N and something called C, and then you can just assign them to p.name and p.cardnum. Then the JSON result will automatically have the right field names. And then again, this is just an example. The real LMS will use slightly better names than N and C, or single character names, but just as an example, you can change it to anything that you need to change it to in a very easy way. And then finally, sometimes the LMS controllers that you're implementing, sometimes they will not require objects directly out of the database. Sometimes they'll just require a result of, like, was it successful or not? So, something like enrolling in a class. We don't want any data back out of that other than, was the enrollment successful or not? So the view will ask for JSON containing a single field called success with a value of true or false. So you can easily create just a new anonymous type with a single field called success and a value of true. Convert that to JSON, and you automatically get what the view needs, and then you can return that back. So when debugging LINQ queries and you're trying to specifically figure out what the JSON value is that you're returning out of your controller, you might think that you could just console.writeLine, JSON, the converted JSON string. But, so I've been slightly misleading a little bit. This method here, JSON, it doesn't actually return a string. It returns a JSON result, which has all the information needed to create the JSON string, but if you try to print it in C#, it won't actually show you the JSON string. You'd have to do a bunch of digging through the fields and objects to find what string it would actually turn into. So the way that I'll recommend debugging, if you want to see the JSON string that you're passing back to the view, is just go into the view and print it. So this is a little JavaScript thing right here that will pop up a browser message, and you can put in some string in there. So JSON.stringify data. Data is the JSON result that you will return back to the view, and you don't really have to worry too much about how all of this works. Let me just show you, though, the one thing that you will ever need to do in the views. So here is the library scaffold demo that we've been looking at. This is just a simple little left join query that's giving us all titles and their serial numbers, or null if they don't have a serial number. And then I'm returning JSON query.toArray. So this is going to give us an array where every object inside the array has something called title and something called serial. Okay. Now here is the view. And this is not the view from Homework 6. This is not the actual library web page. This is just a simple demo where all the view does is right here. And again, don't worry too much about JavaScript or really understanding this. Let me just walk through a tiny piece of it. This line here is invoking the all-titles controller, all-titles method from the home controller. So that is this method here. Okay, so that's all that's doing, is it's requesting a method from the server which will return a JSON result. When the view gets the JSON result back, it's in something called data. Data is the result. And then I just have this alert here. Stringify the data, which is the JSON result, and show it in a browser alert. So that's all this web server is going to do. It's not going to actually show a table of books or anything. And the only thing you'll ever need to do in the view is uncomment this alert line. The views I provide will have these commented out. That's the only thing you'll ever need to change, and that's just for debugging. You don't have to write the code that invokes these controllers. And the real views will have a bunch of other code down here that does something with the result other than just make this alert. But let's run that and just examine the JSON that that controller is returning. Okay, so we get some just basic home page, but here's the alert. This is the whole point. So I'm going to copy that into somewhere with a little bigger font so we can examine it. So this is going to be just a big JSON array. So there is the open array bracket. And then here is a single JSON object. It has something called title and it has something called serial. So let me just separate these a little bit. One object per line. Okay, that's enough for now. So we'll notice here there are a couple of the Lorax objects. One of them has this serial, one of them has a different serial. Here's Dune. it has a serial of null, and that's because we did that emulated left join link query. Now let's say, let me go back to the controller, and let's say that the view was actually doing something with the JSON result instead of just spewing it into a message. And in order to do something with it, it needs to know the names of the fields in each object in the array. And it doesn't want something called title and serial. Let's just say, as an example, it just wants something called T and S. And that is all we have to do in order to make our controller compatible with the view. We can put any name we want in here that the view needs, and it will automatically, the JSON converter will just automatically use those names when producing the JSON result. So it's very easy for you to map your models to names that my view will need. And just to verify, we'll just look at one of these books. So there it is with T and S instead of title and serial.